Jesus in My Life, episode 98.
Earl would choke me. And I never thought anything per se about it because I used to think, well, he wasn't punching me. There were no black and blue bruises. And thankfully, I was going to a Christian counselor who said, you know, you could die from choking. But that isn't even what got me to leave him.
Welcome to Jesus in My Life, a podcast with Rob and Jack, where we interview everyday people like me and you about their extraordinary experiences with our Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to another episode of Jesus in My Life podcast. This is your host, Jack, with my co-host, Rob.
Hey, everybody. So glad to be with you today. And Jack, today's episode, let's go. I'm really excited.
Go. This one's going to be a wild one.
Yeah, it's a wild one for sure.
Well, not necessarily wild like that everybody's thinking wild, but it is not the normal American life story.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. We have on the show today, Cheryl, a good friend from our congregation. She is very artistic and we love her for that. Yeah. Cheryl was born into a family that was part of the Socialist Communist Party, and they were hardcore communist socialist. And this is during the civil rights movement. And your mom, in fact, was the first person of color to play in the Philharmonic Symphony. Is that correct?
Orchestra, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, pretty important person in history in our country.
Yes.
Your brother had a documentary made of him. He's an artist named Toth. And
Thoth. She's an applesauce. Thoth. Yes.
And that documentary actually won the 2001 Academy Award for short documentary. Yeah, it was wild.
I know, and he got to go on stage with Samuel Jackson. I just loved watching it.
Wow.
Like, how cool is that? But that's my brother. Yeah. Anyway, not me.
So, Cheryl,
yes.
Thank you for coming on and welcome to the
welcome
show.
to the
I'm
show,
glad to be
Cheryl.
here. I'm excited.
Awesome.
All right. So you got a lot of history to share, but let's distill it down and let's go back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your early life and the fact that, little spoiler, God wasn't at all taught in your family. In fact,
Correct.
You came from an atheist family, right?
Yes. I mean, I didn't know anything else. So most of the people around me were Jewish. So interesting thing was that my mother, my father were very involved in the civil rights. I only knew this kind of recently that my father actually was part of the march. I guess he knew Martin Luther King Jr. Being a doctor, he would go and help a lot. I didn't know that. And then I forget what it was. He was the first white man to be the head of I forget what it was called, another kind of civil rights division. That's funny. I forgot to bring it. I wrote it down to remember. I didn't know any of it. I mean, I was just growing up. I was a kid. I'm the youngest. So my grandmother was religious, and I guess she took us to church a couple of times. So that's the most. I had no idea. I remember going and we had to kneel and cross ourselves, and I'm like, I don't know what all this is. And it was different. My mother, big thing was to love people. Yeah, so I couldn't say as I was growing up, I was aware that we were that way. We lived, well, first we lived with my mother and father were married wherever we were living, St. Albans, New York, if anybody knows it, in a very beautiful house, which I really love, but they got divorced and we moved, and he was Jewish. His family sat Shiva when he married my mother, and we didn't know his family. So, I don't know. I was taken on a peace march in Manhattan. I don't know where it was. I had figured out a while ago what particular one. And as we went and were part of it. So all these different things were happening. We went to this thing, I think it was on Sundays, Ethical Culture Humanist Society. And, the adults would go have their meeting and the kids would go kind of like church, and they'd get a lesson. And I'm pretty sure the lesson was why God isn't real and showing you. The only thing I remember was Bert Kessler was his name, taught. He was, whatever he did, and his secretary was looking from files she couldn't find, and he found them for her. And she said, thank God, and it was him. And so Like at that time, I was a little kid, so I was like, oh, yeah, she should have thanked you, not God. God didn't find it, you know. And now as an adult, I look back, it's like, she probably wasn't even like, it meant nothing. People say that. It doesn't mean anything to them for real.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
But it's serious enough to the atheist that's teaching atheism
Right.
that it was enough to leave an impression on you, though.
Yeah. So that's the only thing I remember. I know that the foundation was there, though.
Yeah.
And that it was laid, that this is the way it was. Russia was this wonderful place. Like, take it back. The Soviet Union, just really considered way up there. Cuba, whatnot. And so, yeah, that's how I was raised. The community, as I said, that I lived in was a community called Parkway Village, made of the United Nations delegates, people from all over the world. Most of the people there, I don't know if they were so much socialist, but definitely very liberal. It was just a very politically liberal community. I think it was founded by, was it Gloria Friedman or whatever, one of the heavy-duty feminist movement people. And that's what I grew up in. That's what I knew. Hate was a bad word in our home. Couldn't say that, except for George Wallace. We were allowed to say we hated him. I know. But he wanted to send African-American folks in crates back to Africa. So, we were allowed to hate him. But, so that's what I learned. And when I look back, I feel like everything I was taught was really the foundation of Christianity, but it was denied. Yeah. It was really what God says. We were to love our neighbors. You were to help people. That was the greater good.
Okay.
Because we're all here on this planet, and how do we get along? Yeah. How do we live here without whatever? So I don't know. I ponder that when a lot of people say they talk to an atheist and they try to say, well, why do we want to be good?
Right.
And they try to show that. But to me, I kind of get it. But I guess you would have a conscience because God gave it to you. But you are all here on this planet for whatever reason. And wouldn't it just be better to live in harmony? And maybe because musical home, harmony is a good thing, rhythm and all of that.
It brings up an interesting point about like the fact that God did establish certain laws, right? And if we took God out of the equation and we just lived by those laws, our society would be in a better condition than it is now, right? There's treating people like they have value, not taking what is others, not unnecessarily taking life, right? Like there's so many aspects of the law that are just simply good living.
Right. And my mother was, very bent on that good living and people being equal, and that why should someone be making $1 million when another person can barely eat off of what they make? And that's therefore why communism and socialism. So I kind of got that. And for the longest, I would just spout whatever my mom said. When we moved to California, so I grew up in New York. That was wonderful. My mother had to work. And so whatever job she could get. So she was a timpanist, but most timpanists are percussionists as well. So she would get jobs like on Broadway, and she'd be the sound effect person. She would be whatever. Her agent would grab her date book and fill it with whatever. And it was fun. In New York, you get to go on field trips. You get to go see the ballet. And it was always, there's Cheryl's mom. It felt so great. I really enjoyed my childhood. There were some negative things. There was a man, a genius musically, but he was not a very moral man. He basically once told my mom, and she said that's why they never got married, he could have sex with anyone he could have lunch with.
Wow.
Which sadly meant children.
Yeah. Wow.
So unfortunately, I don't remember a lot. He said some very inappropriate things to me that made me uncomfortable. But my brother and sister were definitely recipients of Fred's deviant thought patterns. And I told my mom I didn't feel comfortable, that he made me very uncomfortable. And he said things that I didn't like, and she told him. And I can remember that. I can remember driving down. We always had a station wagon. She had to be able to fit her drums in the station wagon. And I remember her saying, and no seatbelts, I'm roaming around in the back of the station wagon having a great time. And suddenly she says, I told Fred what you said. I just remember my heart stopping. Yeah. And I say this because in the sense of my relationship with my mom and how I formed, I realized then I was not safe.
Yeah.
That she wasn't keeping me safe. I don't think I could have said that, but I know due to some things that happened in which I thought, why didn't I listen to my mom? Oh yeah, because I didn't feel safe. I didn't trust her. And I think that was the main thing. The thing is that Fred then went to my sister. So she didn't say which one of us said it, I guess.
Yeah.
Because Fred went to my sister and said, why did you tell on me? You liked the things I do. So my sister said that she didn't know I had told.
Yeah.
So that was something we got to talk about later in time. Anyway, my mom had a lot of discriminatory things happen to her throughout her career. She'd go on tour with, probably it was the New York City Opera, and they couldn't have her sing when they went to the South. So she couldn't go into some hotels with the orchestra. She could, things like that. And a position came vacant in the New York Philharmonic. Her teacher, Saul Goodman, had been playing, and he left. And anyway, it's a crazy story because it came down to her and another gentleman. And one day my brother comes home and says that did you know so-and-so got the job? They never even went through the audition. And it was the timpanist from San Francisco. So it was left an opening in San Francisco, and my mom got it, and we moved to San Francisco in 1972. So that was a little different. So that whole community that I knew, which were a lot of the really tight-knit community, these African-American women who married these Jewish men, and we would all get together. We would have Passovers.
Wow.
Like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know. What is this?
Yeah.
I was the youngest. I got to say that line that the youngest, like, why, what, I didn't know what I was saying. It's so beautiful to now be a Christian, though, and think, oh, wow. But
Cheryl, I got a question. If we can go back just a bit, I would imagine that where your story is going, there will be some transitions up ahead. But I'm curious, because of the type of home that you were raised religiously or not religiously in that sense, were you encouraged to ask questions? Like you were raised in a home where, God's not real. Were you in an environment that at least you could ask the question? Say more specifically, could you ask the question? Were you allowed to ask the question? Is God real?
I have no idea, because I don't think I ever thought your parents telling you God's not real. You're going to this, God's not real. It never occurred to me to ask, like, what? My mom did encourage questioning, because that's what I think one of the things that turned her off was she had a lot of questions, and my grandparents were of that era.
Yep.
You don't ask, because I don't think they even knew themselves.
Correct.
Yep.
But they definitely did not welcome questioning at all. So she wasn't getting any of her questions answered.
Got it.
Sadly, her defining moment was when she was in high school and she started getting involved politically. And someone in one of the groups, because she was like, I can't come to that meeting. I have to go home and pray. I have a test tomorrow. And he said, why are you going to go home and pray? Like, why don't you go home and study? So my mom, like a light bulb came on. I was like, oh, yeah, I should go home and study. So no one was there to tell her, yeah, you go home and study, but you're still praying.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She, I guess, learned rote prayers, and that was what she knew. She didn't know a relationship with God. So when she came to that conclusion, got involved in the civil rights, and she raised her kids. So back to also my grandmother taking us to church twice. I guess I never heard it. I'm the youngest. My sister told me that my mother and grandmother had a big fight about taking my children to church. Which was interesting, because something similar happened where my mom didn't want to do something, and I'm like, those are my children. Now we're talking a slightly different thing. My mom, oh yeah, I'm open to whatever and anybody, and
except religion. Well, I mean, that's a major tenet of communism, right? Right.
Oh, and the opiate of the people.
Exactly. Yeah. They're very anti-religion.
I'm getting into arguments with my friends who were Christians. I didn't have many friends that I know of. I mean, looking back now, maybe I did, but all my friends were Jewish. Sadly, most Jewish people, there was one friend who was kind of kept kosher. Yeah. But for the most part, they're not religiously Jewish.
Sure.
It's their culture. We eat certain foods on certain times. Yeah. I celebrated when I was little. I remember celebrating Hanukkah because I remember spinning the dreidel, but that's about all I remember about it. Lighting the candles. We did do that. So I guess it was just more a tradition thing, like some people who do Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, they don't know what they're
It
doing.
was a cultural thing.
Right. So
You had Christian friends though. Like, what age was this? Are you like in high school at the time, or what?
well, I moved to San Francisco just after my 13th birthday.
Okay.
I went to one school for 8th grade. It was the public school. So also the thing to know is my mother, my brother, and my sister all went to music and art. So I just assumed I would go to music and art. It's really weird because you have to audition to get in. And I don't remember if I thought I was going to get in musically or through my art. Either way, it was like, I don't know why. I just assumed I would go. I did. But we moved and I couldn't. So I was kind of very disappointed about that. Yeah. So I was going to this one junior high and a team of people come from a high school that had been all boys that was now going to go co-ed called Lick Wilmerding High School. But it was private. And I went and visited it. They didn't have music, but their art, and you had to take art and drafting, metal, wood shop, machine shop, electric. I was just like, I want to go to this school.
Yeah. Wow.
And I don't know. I think I got a scholarship. It was the least expensive at that time, anyway, of all the private schools. And it was wonderful. There were 200, I think, and 40 some odd students in the whole school.
Yeah, it's a tight-knit community.
And I was one of very few girls because we were the first group. Sadly, as someone, I'm in a school, there were maybe 3 other African Americans, one boy who lived his whole life in a very European community. So they didn't know what to do with me. I mean, I just was me. I never stopped to think. I mean, I really didn't really think that much about my skin tone or how I looked per se. Used to wear my hair in 4 braids. I was like, I don't know. I was just me.
Yeah.
And being me. And of course, there was a little bit of whatever because everybody knew who my mother was pretty much. And there were actually a few other children whose parents were in the symphony orchestra that went there. But that's, I think, when I would get into arguments. Actually, I even did in 8th grade. My poor history teacher, boy, he was, I think, in the reserves or something. And me and this other kid, we would just talk about communism and how great communism is. And you could see the teacher's eyes would get really wide, like, no, that's not okay. Anyhow, that was, I mean, it wasn't anything it was just what my mom had taught me.
You were parenting.
So, yes. Yeah. And, still in that, I love my mom and all that phase of my life. So then I did get into the high school. And I'm arguing with people a little bit, but a lot of times I'd hear my Jewish and Christian friends arguing. It just went, well, I think Jesus was a person, but I would be like, I don't know what you all are talking about. Like, what?
Out of curiosity, did you even know who the historical figure of Jesus was at this time?
I don't think so. Okay. I mean, I watched Ben-Hur. I love Charlton Heston. So I would watch Ben-Hur, but
yeah, Jesus plays a small part in that movie, though.
Godspell, right? What was he? Jesus Christ Superstar. All of that kind of came out.
Yeah, sure.
But it didn't mean anything. I used to say to people, I don't know, what's the difference between Christianity, Protestantism, and Catholicism?
Yeah.
And no one could answer my question, actually. It's kind of like...
That's kind of sad, actually.
It is. Now I know things that I know. I'm thinking, wow. That's like crazy because there was a Catholic church just outside. They had this really fun hill that we used to like to ride our bike down. We used to like to sneak in there because it was so dark and spooky. And that's all I know is that, okay, this is spooky. I had no clue what it was. So as I said, I would listen to my Jewish and Christian friends kind of argue. And I had a friend, Debbie Adams, and Debbie was Catholic. And one day she came and she said, there are these people in my church and they have these meetings and they talk in this different language. And she said, I was in it. And the next thing I knew, my hands were shaking. And I just knew, I knew whatever had happened to her was real.
Okay.
I didn't know what it was, but it was like I could not experience, right? You can't deny someone's experience. So I didn't know what it was. And
this must have been like the charismatic movement that passed through the Catholic Church.
I think, yeah. she ended up moving to I don't know what happened to her, but she moved to the Valley of the Moon up there, Sonoma or whatever, and started living with some community, which worried me a little bit that, a lot of those communities were cults. I don't know what happened to her. So I never got to share with her the impact that what she said had on me. Wow. Because before she moved, she came and I think she did this with all her friends, kind of basically shared her story, hoping.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of looking at her like, okay, yeah, whatever you say. At that time, I was like starting into this very wild period in my life, whatever. But meanwhile, a very important thing happened. So backtrack to my mom and all the things that she was involved in. So in orchestras, and this is part of how that guy was able to come in, they used to do an open audition. So they would see who you were. And a lot of discrimination would happen. So my mother and two other people came up with this idea. Actually, it might have been more than two. They did this orchestra, but they came up with this idea of auditioning behind a screen so that you couldn't know who it was. And that's actually how she ended up getting the job in San Francisco. They used a screen. So that worked. But she also came up with what used to happen too, was when you'd get a different conductor, like the American Symphony was Leopold Stokowski's baby. But the guest conductors would come in. Guest conductors had the right to fire. I don't want you. I don't want you. Go to the union. I want somebody different. My mother never had a problem with that. She never had a conductor that didn't want her. They were all always excited when they actually saw her. I don't remember which famous conductor it was that said, yeah, he liked her because she was so lively and he just, and her intonation and all of that, because the timpanist is considered the second conductor in the orchestra. So that is very important, and her rhythm was like impeccable. So when we moved to San Francisco, they started doing tenure so that conductors couldn't just come in and you'd be out of a job for the next job. And what do you do? So my mom never thought about it. She thought that was a good thing to have the tenure. And then in San Francisco Symphony, it was a panel of 7 men, European men. Each one had from 1 to 100 to vote whether she should get tenure or not. So you had to have somewhere between 350 and 700. 2 of the members gave her a 1.
Wow.
It's like, okay, at that point, we're talking 1974. My mother started playing in 1949. New York Philharmonic, New York City Opera, then American Ballet. I mean, just all these companies and all these conductors. How do you get a 1?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, on one level, it didn't work out. On one level, that's kind of good that at least they didn't get together and say, let's all give her a 49. Yeah. Or really, all it would have taken was one person to give her a 49 and the rest to do 50. And then she would have just been 349. Yeah. But instead, she got some really low thing like 70.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't even think a student would get
that low.
So she sued and she lost. So she sued again and she lost again. And I just don't think she ever fully recovered. So that was like my second year in high school. And by the end of high school, I couldn't wait to get out of the house and started my first real job when Star Wars, the very first original, came out, and worked at the movie theater and met husband number 1. And then I started college, and around there I started to think, I think that there's something. Everybody believes in something bigger than themselves. I don't care what they call it. It's not everybody. There is something bigger. And these days, the universe. Right. Anyway, I was open, became kind of open that way, but it had nothing to do with me.
Atheism to agnosticism.
Yeah.
And Cheryl, was the experience of your friend, was that kind of just in the back of your mind?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of like it said, Mary treasured these things in their heart. So it was just tucked away.
Yeah.
There, like, okay, I don't know what happened there. In college, that's when I really became kind of open to that. There's something. I had gotten approached by the Moonies. And that's where I can see God's hand, because I had just been, it was around Halloween, and I had just been at a friend's party where I didn't really know anybody, and I felt very uncomfortable. So I didn't like the idea of being in a situation where I don't know anybody. And at that time, I love your wife for this, I hated small talk. Like, can we just get to the deep stuff? And I love Kara because Kara has shown why you have to do that small talk. You get that opening into people's lives. So I'm learning. But anyway, I was going to the eye doctor. I was in San Francisco, and these 2 people come up to me and corner me. two people. How did two people? But they do it deliberately. They swooped around so that one was standing on the street side, and here's the building. You can't see what I'm doing, folks. Sorry. Here's the street side, someone standing there, and then the other person is standing maybe the way I was going, so that they kind of trap me, even though, they must be studying that mentally. A person's not going to think going back because I'm going that way. Yeah. Anyway, they surrounded me and they're like, oh, whatever. They start talking to me and, we have these dinners and you should come. And that was after we talked for just a little bit, kind of struck up a connection. And all I could think is, I don't want to go somewhere where I don't know anybody. But they're also talking about food. And I'll do almost anything for food. And so it was like, I'd like to go because that would be a free meal. But I won't know anybody. And they're like, oh, we have this bus and you can just get on the bus. And I'm thinking, well, I would need to call my boyfriend. Well, you could call him from there. I'm like, I don't like that idea. And they really were very adamant about me not contacting him till I got to wherever. Because I'm like, well, why can't he come with us? I don't know. They had their reasons, but I don't fully know how I got out of it. I don't know if I just said, yeah, no, thank you.
Out of curiosity, just for those that don't know who the
Moonies.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about who are the Moonies.
The Moonies were very big back then. This would have probably been like 1977, 78, somewhere around there. They were a cult, Valley of the Moon in that area. Sun Myung Moon started this cult. And that was what they were known for. They would invite people to a meal and you never left after that. And then somehow I think you got what they said was they deprived you of food or they fed you very little. So you became susceptible and you weren't allowed to contact your family. And then they started, brainwashing you into whatever their philosophy was. And you would see these things on the news or these stories of how people were trying to rescue their families and their families wouldn't want to leave because they'd been so indoctrinated into that. It was very scary, because there's repercussions. It's the same with sex trafficking. Those women who are conditioned, it's very hard. They've learned certain patterns of being that are very hard to break. And even after you come out of it, you'll find yourself maybe doing things that are really weird. Anyhow,
Did you get on the bus?
No.
Oh,
I was.
God.
That's what I'm saying. I just know because the idea, like I said, of going somewhere where I don't know people, and they wouldn't let me call my boyfriend. Of course, then there were no cell phones or anything.
Yeah, right.
So it was like, I don't like that idea. And I don't know if it was before my eye appointment or I think it was before because the bus leaves, I think, from a central area at a certain time. And so they said, well, you could meet us here. And I was just like, yeah, no, that's okay. I'm glad I didn't do it because I didn't know at the time. I then was telling some friends what happened and they're like, oh, yeah, those were the Moonies. And I'm like, oh, wow. So I didn't know. So
do you view that as a moment in your life that God spared you from something, even though
definitely.
You weren't following him? Yeah,
definitely. Because then a similar thing happened with Jehovah's Witnesses. I got into argument. They came up to me. And at that time, I had opened to the fact that there is a God, but this is what I say. God doesn't want me to bow down and worship him. He is not egotistical. And if he does, he'll let me know.
Yeah.
So I'm fine where I am. He doesn't want me believing any certain way. Just as long as that I do believe in him, I'm okay. So, the Jehovah's Witnesses came and they were trying to say whatever they were trying to say. And I'm just like, well, why do I have to do it your way?
Right.
And I don't remember what they said. I just remember saying, no, I'm sorry. I don't want to have anything. Just I'm like, God, thank you. You just get me from these different things.
So Cheryl, I'm very curious, when did your full acceptance of Jesus arrive? Are we close to that?
Husband. So I'm with husband number one. We met at the movie theater that I was working at. Cute little story, but I won't tell it. I didn't know really fully that he had been very involved in, what is it, First Covenant? What are they called? It's a Swedish or whatever denomination. And he had been the youth or the music or something. I don't know. But anyway, we met and we started dating. And he believed in God, but he was very anti-organized religion. We're together and my life is unraveling pretty quickly. lot of things happened. I had an abortion. I really believed that child would be dead. So he was very into coke. At that time, coke was so that was really cool. I'm with this guy who does coke. But slowly those things started falling away and moved a lot. And in one of the places we lived, there was a pastor living down the street. And I didn't know Earl, is his name, had told the pastor that he would do some work, and the pastor paid him in advance, which is something Earl would do a lot. So he had his money so he could go buy drugs. And Earl got arrested because we had no money. I don't even know how this happened. His dad, he hadn't had any contact, and somehow he got contacted with his dad. They got reconnected, but his dad sent him some of his work checks that I don't even know how this all happened. It was like not totally aware. All I know is that one day Earl has these checks that he's going to go to the bank and check and cash in whatever. The bank immediately found out they were forgeries. And then Earl was at the Gap trying to buy stuff. I guess he was just trying to get them. I don't know what he was doing. And they called, so Cap called the bank, and the bank said, hold him. And Earl, I guess, got wind. Something was going on, and he left the shop, and the security guard had a gun, shot him. And the next thing, I'm getting a call where I'm working. Your husband, so I'm thrown off even by that, is in jail. He got shot, but he's okay. I'm the paramedic, and he wanted me to call you and let you know. So with that, I had to go to the pastor and tell him, Earl's in jail. He said to come tell you. I didn't know that the guy had paid him in advance. I didn't know anything. I did all this stuff that went around. I actually have a criminal record because of some stuff that Earl did. Crazy life that I was living for a while there. And that's why it was just crazy. And I knew it. And it was like when I turned up pregnant, it was like, I can't do this. But I had never wanted to do that. Sadly, my mom had 4 abortions. So it wasn't because my mom was against it or anything. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if she knows I ever did that. I almost died too. That was totally legal. It was sadly after 3 months, it was in a hospital, and surgeon did not get all of the tissue out, and I hemorrhaged a few weeks later. And thankfully, as much as Earl is whatever, he got me to the hospital. But all of these things are, they are working together to like show me, one, that I'm not on a good path.
Yeah.
So I go to the pastor to tell him, and I use Madeleine L'Engle. Do either of you know that author?
No.
She's, I think, Catholic, but she wrote these wonderful books with these families, science and music, and they made a movie of the one. I always want to say A Wrinkle in Time. She's the one who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, and there's a series of books. But when you read the books, the families are so beautiful, how together they are. There's learning, education, science, music, kind of what I felt like the environment I grew up in, because my mom was very much, she had us play games that I didn't realize were really rather great educationally. And of course, we all had to play some instrument and so on and so forth. Aside, that's not true. She said, my kids stopped playing because of what happened during the symphony. That's not true. I don't think I ever thought of pursuing music. It was really more about art for me. Actually, I wanted to have a nurse's school. But anyway, so the pastor was very kind. He was like, well, is there anything I can do to help you? And I don't know. I think I found out I was pregnant with Hyacinth then, somewhere around that time. And I said, Cheryl, he goes, well, how about if I drive you out to Santa Rita to see Earl? Thank you. Sure. Great. So one time he drove me out, and on the way back, he got an inspiration for a sermon that was around math. I don't even remember fully what it was, but he took some math principle, and I love math, and he connected it with how God's something. And I'm just sitting there like, what? And then he was being so helpful, and I loved his home. His home felt like that book, like I was in that story. It was so peaceful, and it was like, this is what I want for my life. And then I realized I had better start going to his church because they're being so nice to me.
So you end up at church because you feel guilty that they're being so nice. I love it.
A Methodist, but also because just how excited he got.
Yeah.
And I love to see people and the light bulbs go on and they get these ideas. At the time I was working, so I couldn't, but then it got to a point where I had to stop working because I was pregnant and I wasn't allowed to be. So working at Fenton's Ice Creamery, perfect place for a pregnant woman.
That's great.
That was great because I then weighed, well, at one point I weighed 107 pounds, but then I was, doing Coke and all that. So I was 115 when I got pregnant with Hyacinth. And so I start going to the church. It's a Methodist church. God bless them. And I would listen, and I got this is so funny. So I started going. Earl was actually still in jail. There was a lawyer who was part of the congregation, so he became Earl's because it was illegal, actually, it turns out, for that security guard to have had a gun. He was an ex-felon, so he really had no business having a gun and shooting Earl. So there was a whole, case and whatever being worked out. And so there again, they're helping. They were really a wonderful community. But what I started doing was I started listening. My friend's experience. What was that? Here I am now in church. Yeah. Oh, and I was going to say, I used to curse up a storm, and I guess I was in church cursing. And Earl says to me this after he's out of jail, he says, you probably shouldn't do that. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, you had no idea that was...
Okay.
Yeah.
I know.
Right?
And I really don't think... I think they were enough whatever that they didn't care.
Sure, yeah.
Sure. But, he had his background, and it's like, you don't do certain things. And so we were going there for a little bit. We did get married. I had Hyacinth. He was actually still in jail when I had Hyacinth, but he was in work furlough program. So he got to come out and be there. And they're just, loving on us. And I'm not hearing, these people don't know what the Holy Spirit's all about. And I'm like, okay, I don't know. It was just very interesting. And like I said, then denominations, they moved that pastor. I guess you're supposed to only be 5 years at most, and he'd been more than 5 years. So they moved him, and the new guy who came in
didn't connect with him.
Yeah. I also remember the first time I went there, remembering from when my grandmother, I'm like, okay, I asked friends, how do you cross yourself? And one friend goes, I don't think they do that at that
Yeah, you were thinking still Catholic, right?
Oh no. Yeah. And so anyway, but I'm open and I'm listening. And they had what was it called? They had this program. It was like a 12-week program where you're learning, you're going more in depth and studying. And I was doing it and I loved it. But they still didn't really know about the Holy Spirit. I remember in conversations, I don't know.
Well, how did you know about the Holy Spirit? Yeah. You're talking about, is that from your conversation with Debbie? From
yeah, and then there was also a young lady at that church we became friends with because we got involved in the youth ministry. And there was one of the women, she came out of a satanic thing. So she had heard voices and she didn't share that with many people, but she and I were talking and I really believed her.
Yeah.
But when you're there and nobody there seems to know what. And as I said, Earl and poor Earl, unfortunately, was very addicted and is now I know, a narcissist and abusive and needed help. They also were having a hard time. So one day we had a big fight and he calls, we were watching the 700 Club early in the morning, I guess. And he calls... I have to back up because he was also working for some construction company, I think it was. And the guy there had a couple of times talked to Earl about this church, Shiloh Christian Fellowship. Oh, it was, really good or whatever. So we had a young lady from the Methodist church who would babysit Hyacinth occasionally. And she then one day says, I've started going, I noticed that she wasn't at our church. She said, I started going to this church, Shiloh Christian Fellowship. Okay, number 2 time. So whatever day that was, I don't remember if it was before church, it was just a separate day, call the 700 Club. And there's a woman that he talks to, Eve West. She's like, well, can I pray for you? And he says, yes. And they pray and they do whatever. She goes, well, where do you live? Oh, in Oakland. She goes, well, I go to this church.
And so again, Shiloh again.
God's hand.
You ought to come sometime. Wow. So that's what it was. That was a different time. So then one morning, we had been fighting and it was now late. And it was like, their service lasted maybe a half hour. Yeah. It's very set. Sure. And we're like, well, let's try this church. And we go. Now, to back up too, we had been one time we were up in Tahoe. I don't think it was with the youth retreat. We had been in Tahoe for something and went to a more charismatic church. And I remember kind of being in the back and, I liked that it was a little bit more exuberant and expressive, but, people are raising their hands and I'm kind of like, okay, I don't know. So we go to Shiloh, very similar, but it's very big. And we're in the back and people are raising their hand and praying, whatever. And at the end, after the sermon, there's the altar call. And I thought, our life is in such a mess. So I had my eyes closed, raised my hand. I guess Earl had his eyes closed. He raised his hand. So, okay, so come down to the altar. So, okay. So go down to the altar, and I prayed with this woman who had this like the most gorgeous blue eyes, which is actually funny because sometimes Hyacinth's eyes, when her eyes get bloodshot, will turn that same blue. It's just this,
And that's your oldest daughter.
yeah. It's just this incredible blue.
Yeah.
And we're praying, and I was very vague. I just said, I'm having problems with my husband, and I don't know, whatever I said. She prayed kind of short, and we got done. And shortly thereafter, I thought, oh, I really want to find her and talk to her. I think I want to be more specific about what's going on, because Earl was praying with someone and they were taking a long time. So it was like, okay. So I'm looking, I couldn't even remember what she looked like. I just remembered those blue eyes. That's all I remembered about her, but I didn't see anybody like that. So, and then wait, and finally Earl's done, and the gentleman says, well, we're inviting you over for lunch. And I said to them, well, I would really like to find the woman that I prayed with. I said, oh, well, sure. And he says, okay, well, how about, I don't know, whatever time it was. They said, around 2. So we went back home, we changed, we go. We ring the doorbell, and guess who answers the door?
The lady with the blue eyes.
Wow.
It was just like,
Wow.
and she says, oh, this is the woman I prayed with today. So that was like the first, like, wow, God, whoa.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether I did talk to her more at that point. I did get plugged in, but so we started going there quickly. So they also had a Bible college. And at the time, Pastor Violet she was the founding pastor, and she was in charge, and everybody had to go to Bible college. So all the Sunday school classes were the Bible college classes. So if you didn't actually enroll in the Bible college, you just audited, but you were getting information. You just weren't doing the papers and the tests and all of that. So I didn't know that was abnormal. I just thought, this is great. And this is one of the things why I drive as far as I drive to go to Living Water. Because one of the things she said, and I don't know if it was when we were reading the book of Ruth or there was something, and she was talking about loyalty. She said, so you don't leave a church just because there's something you don't like or whatever. She said, you pray. You be a support, and you pray that if they're going off course, that God put them back, that they start listening. So that, for me,
Wow.
you don't just jump ship because you think, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Mm.
You know what that reminds me of is the prophets in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Right? They're linked to Israel. There's so many prayers of prophets in the Old Testament who pray in a way as if they are committing the sin of their nation.
Yeah.
Right? They are so tethered to their people that they take ownership
of what
was taking place. And I think, to your point, we are so quick to end things when it doesn't go our way, instead of being an instrument of redemption, of reconciliation, of I'm going to pour into this until they don't want me anymore.
Yeah,
right?
or till God says
go.
I don't want you there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that did happen when I moved I was going to one church, and I really did feel like the Lord said, yeah, this isn't it. And I started going to 2 churches, and then it was like, no, commit to Third Day Worship Center. So that started that. But anyway, so here we are, and we're now in that, and just dived in. The other thing that was hard about the Methodist Church, who went there? I don't know if either one of you would know, but we'll see. Did you know who Al Adels? He was a coach for the Warriors.
Okay.
So he went there, but that was out of however many people, that was the only dark face that was there. And then it wasn't interracial. So that was important to me. It's great that you're African American, but if you're not interracial, my experience was you don't get me.
Yeah.
Because I was discriminated against more actually by African American growing up. I wasn't African American enough. And then of course I wasn't black enough. I was an Oreo. I was whatever. And one of my best friends in high school, he was like, apologized, because when we first met, he was Samoan. He was like, yeah, I thought you were an Oreo. And it was like, oh gosh, I'm me.
Yeah.
Exactly. And as radical as my mom was, though, she sheltered me. I was the baby. because it was really sad when I think, and my brother remembers all these things people said. He remembers someone saying to my mom, you should be thankful they didn't come out polka dotted.
Wow.
I was illegal in a lot of states when I was born, and I'm the youngest, so it's like, wow. But my mom really sheltered me. My brother and my sister somehow weren't so sheltered, so they were more aware of things. I was this happy-go-lucky kid. Like, well, I rarely think about, I do now more because just of the climate and the way things have changed, what I look like. That if I'm in a room of very, very light people, that I'm like the darkest person in the room. I never, so what?
Yeah.
It should be so what?
It should be.
Yeah. And that's how I was raised, being in the United Nations community. I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I can embrace anybody. Anyhow, so here we are at Shiloh, and
So Cheryl, you're attending Shiloh Church. You seem to be getting pretty plugged in. Earl is being pretty plugged in. Would you say at this point that you've surrendered your life to Jesus?
Not 100%. I have accepted that Jesus came, he died, so why didn't I surrender? And rose again. So I am believing all of that, but I don't think I have physically said, I know I haven't, I surrender. There were just a lot of stuff going on with Earl and myself, and just not knowing what to do. Crazy, still life was pretty crazy. Earl was a complicated person, I think. They were saying then you couldn't get addicted to cocaine, but he was pretty addicted to cocaine.
Sure. Yeah.
And I sadly don't know how Earl was raised, because I've come to find out since he passed that a lot of things he told me were all lies. Mm-hmm. He said he was a Green Beret, he'd been in the Army 3 years, so I'm thinking when he passed, yay, Hyacinth and Alex are going to get survivors benefits. Found out he was in the Army 11 months. And he used to hate when people talk about Green Bay. So I don't know. But anyway, it was shortly after we started going to Shiloh. I was in the apartment we were living in, and I was praying. And I was sitting there in tears, and I threw my hands up and I said, God, I surrender. And I really felt God said, everything is going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So I come running out of there, and I go up to Earl, and I was like, yay, everything's going to be okay. Sadly, everything was not okay with Earl.
Yeah.
In our relationship, but everything was okay because I could surrender. And then I remember being able to pick up my Bible and reading it was now effortless. Wow. Before that, I used to, how do people read this thing? And especially the Old Testament. And it was like, I would try and struggle. And it's just so much changed. And then, so this is a hard one because of different people's takes on it. Shiloh's take at the time was, you had to speak in tongues. And I went and I did have an encounter, and I did. But I now know that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a gift of the Spirit. We recognize it. It's not a requirement.
Right. So whatever. And fast forward, I got involved in the dance ministry. And one thing led to another. And then finally I realized Earl would choke me. And I never thought anything per se about it, because I used to think, well, he wasn't punching me. There were no black and blue bruises. And thankfully, I was going to a Christian counselor who said, you could die from choking. But that isn't even what got me to leave him. His behavior towards Hyacinth started becoming very questionable. And the counselor said, I'm going to have to call CPS. And then he's going to kill me. The counselor was like, yeah, he has to do that. And God worked, because my grandmother would write. He would always want to know what she said, whatever. And I had started thinking I need to leave. So we were living in the Oakland Hills in this really little cabin, but in the back it had these chicken coops that whoever previously had tried to make into like rooms, and we had washing. So I had put a big box and just started throwing clothes in there, and he would never go up there. And one day my grandmother sent me some money. And Earl didn't ask anything, or no, she didn't say anything. Usually she would say, oh, I'm sending you. She didn't say anything in the letter. So I could let him read the letter.
And you kept the money.
And I kept the money. Mm-hmm. And I had planned to leave. This was like a Monday or Tuesday. And I had planned to leave him on the Friday. And I called this shelter. And the shelter that I thought I was calling, they were having their whatever meeting. So it was a different shelter that answered. And they're like, why don't you leave right now? Like, why are you going to wait till Friday?
Yeah.
You don't know what could happen.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I have the car. Earl had me take him to work, and I came home with the car. So I have the car. I guess I could leave. And I did. The most amazing thing, and who knows if this, I don't know that Earl, he might have accidentally killed me. I don't think he would have deliberately, but that day in the shelter, and I don't know if it was while they were talking to me. Yeah. So the shelter I went to was in Livermore. One woman in the shelter, so they have a rule, you can't see your ex-person for so many days. She decided to go meet him. Guess what? He killed her. So I arrive at this shelter with all this going on and being like totally freaked out, but safe. And then while I was there, I found a church called Oasis of Life. And it was so perfect because here I was away from whatever in an oasis. And it just was really amazing, the whole thing. And it wasn't easy. I mean, it wasn't easy at all. But, when I returned, Shiloh embraced me. Yeah. I mean, a lot of things happened because then I ended up with husband number 2, who really wasn't very different from husband number 1, except he wasn't physical, So it was like, wow, okay. But anyway, God's been very good. Sadly, I also don't remember a lot of things. I really feel like it was like on survival. And sometimes Hyacinth will tell me certain things and it's like, oh, okay.
Wow.
But,
I look at your story and I see the fact of God's faithfulness. Despite the environment you were raised in, he protected you.
Yeah.
He did.
Despite the choices that you made yourself, he protected you and he made a way for you.
Yeah.
Made a way for you to escape the lifestyle that was going to lead to destruction.
It was. So between the abortion, one time I done too much coke one night. And I remember thinking, I got to go to the bathroom, and coming back, I was just like, I just want to go to bed. And I thought I laid down on the bed. And Earl told me no. He said there was a dresser with a very sharp edge, and I dived at it. So I had this big, it didn't break the skin, but it was amazing that something worse didn't happen.
Yeah.
I didn't wake up right then, but I started to see my life wasn't good. Thankfully, my mother did raise a whatever child. And it was like, I had a weird thing, you can't do more than one drug at a time. So I was doing coke, couldn't smoke, couldn't do whatever.
Which is a good thing that you had this rule. Where did it come from, right?
Exactly.
I guess,
exactly.
It was weird. I know, I look back and I think my closest friend in high school got involved in heroin. And of course, she told me, she said, I know you'd be mad if I didn't tell you. But the fact that I was with Earl, he went ballistic when I told him that my friend had offered, because he was like, don't do that.
Yeah.
That he had some weird whatever. You just don't. Sadly, his journey just went, because he ended up dying basically of a drug overdose, pharmaceutical drugs. For me, I have always danced, and dance has always been a way to express my emotions. Mm-hmm. So I went to Shiloh and they had that. I was able to dance, and I can't not, because I feel like to describe God and everything, just to stand there isn't enough. I need to use all of space to do that. And that also has to do anything with my art. And you just use everything around you because he's so great. How do you, I don't know, how do you contain it all?
Yeah. That's one thing I really appreciate about you is your willingness to dance before the Lord, unashamed. Doesn't matter.
That's the one thing I can do, because at Shiloh we had a team, we'd go out, and they do block parties and everything, and the dancers would dance. I never had a problem dancing. But if I have to talk to people about, that's so hard.
Yeah.
Oh, could you just watch me dance? I just,
thank you for coming on here and sharing your story.
Sharing it.
Yeah, you had to tell us.
100%.
Yeah. And I don't think we have much time to dive into the rest of the story, but I'm going to assure our listeners that God continued the pattern of saving Cheryl.
Yes.
Because it's a process, right? We're all a process.
It is.
Right? You went in a mess, and he is making a masterpiece.
Yes.
That's so cool. Yeah. God's masterpiece. Yeah. Because then life hasn't been easy. It hasn't been. So, when people say, oh, your promise is no, you're not. But God is faithful.
I wish our listeners, in many ways, because, we're in studio, we're in person as we're recording this, and to see everything around your story and being able to see you share it. I think there's just a little bit of taste for our listeners to get at least a glimpse of that, to know that from your story, all the intricate details of it. I mean, to see the hand of God on your life, Cheryl, it is so incredible. And to see it firsthand as you're sharing your story.
For me, it's also just to remember, I don't often think back on everything that I've been through.
Yeah.
So I don't think, whatever. But then when I start retelling, and it's like, I've been through a lot. And I just think when people see me, they may not understand. I mean, there's a whole nother story about something that happened at Third Day Worship Center. But the bottom line is, I don't just get up there flippantly.
Yeah.
To whom, what is it about worshiping much? Like the alabaster box, you give everything. And because he's done so much, it's just, and
wow.
It's not me. I mean, even though I was raised to be whatever, the bottom line is that's not who I was raised to be.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful ending to this beautiful story. And truly the best is yet to come. Cheryl, I'm so thankful that you came on today and were able to share the authentic story. And, that the foundation of this podcast really does come from that mandate, but it's not a forced mandate. It's just sharing your story of all the things God has done. And I'm so grateful that you've been able to do that today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. I have to thank you guys.
Yeah, I love it. God rescues us out of all our circumstances.
Amen. The foundation of Jesus in My Life podcast really does come from the story of Luke chapter 8, where Jesus is kind of semi-confronted by a man who is not only demon oppressed, he's demon possessed, and he's been cast out of society, left to his own devices. Jesus approaches him and obviously confronts that, delivers him and saves him, heals him. And in that moment, the man says to Jesus, I'm sure looking eye to eye, I want to now follow you. Let me follow you. And Jesus says, no, I got a different assignment for you. I want you to go back to your family and tell them what I've done for you. And this man, I just love that at the end part of the story in Luke 8, where he goes and shares. I would imagine he shared it with his family, but that was not enough for him. He had to go share it with the rest of the town. And so many people were, I'm sure, obviously amazed, but also questioning, was this really true? Did this really happen? Who was it that you met? And I'm sure he just constantly would remind them, it's Jesus, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Cheryl, you have done that today. And I'm so grateful that you have come on the show to proclaim Jesus in your life.
Amen.
Thank you for sharing. Everybody else, stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And now, a reflection on today's interview. Cheryl reminds me that God is worthy to be praised for everything that he's done in our life. And Cheryl really does that every Sunday at our church. And I'm encouraged today to be more expressive in my gratitude towards God. And I hope you're encouraged to as well. Lastly, I want to throw in a little bonus clip here of something that Cheryl said before we started the interview. We had just prayed, and I was thanking God for how he has worked in Cheryl's life. And this is what she said coming out of that prayer.
So again, I just say something as you were praying that hit me was I found a book. I was going to bring it. My mom says I'm trying to get rid of all her books. That was, I think it was someone who was a pastor or minister who defected. And so he's writing a book about, Christians and how it's all based in Jesus. There's hardly even little evidence that Jesus was real. Anyway, all of that to say, yes, I wasn't raised as a Christian, but I can say for sure, because as you were thanking the Lord for the gifting, that God has had his hand on me. He's prepared me. And so I think he prepares everybody. And he made it, because God is real. And just because you don't believe doesn't mean God isn't still there working in your life. And so, so I can see how God has prepared me to be this person in worship, in whatever that I am today. So, okay.
Thank you for listening to Jesus in My Life. New episodes release every Tuesday. Subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member. If you would like to help our visibility online, consider rating us and posting a review on Apple Podcast. Have an awesome Jesus in My Life story? Contact us at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com.